Hello everyone. As a self-builder with timber frame, you can build an entire house with very few tools and in super quick time. But what's the best saw for a self-builder? Here I'll show you what to use and the best way to use it. Now, because of all the cutting that's involved in stick construction, as timber frame construction is often called, choosing the correct saw and cutting technique is key to speed and success. Now, I used to love using a chop saw or miter saw, and you can pick up a miter saw these days for very little. This Evolution saw took care of this decking, this flooring, this house extension. Crazy value compared to the cost of a miter saw just 15 years ago. Now, the big pain was always the need for a cord and a plug socket, and if you're working in some situations you need to work at 110 volts for health and safety requirements and a step down transformer. More kit, more hassle. So I was very excited when companies such as Dewalt and Makita started marketing their cordless miter saws. And if you're using them on a regular basis, the juicy price tag really isn't such a big deal versus the value that they add, and especially if you're already bought into their ecosystem, I think you call it, with their excellent batteries and the chargers to go with them. Now, I tend to use Dewalt as my go-to brand. I had Makita tools that were coming to the end of their life, and they were excellent. They were actually the first manufacturer who incorporated lithium batteries. But I was given a Dewalt driver to try a few years back. I loved the ergonomics as well as the torque. The size suited my physique, and that's what I've stuck with since. Milwaukee, Hitachi, Ryobi, they're all excellent as well, all having their own particular advantages, which I'll probably talk about in more detail somewhere else. But for example, the best nail gun is Milwaukee, but their tools are quite heavy. The best brushless driver hammer drill combo, in my experience, is Hitachi, and if you're an occasional user, you could consider the cheaper and perhaps a slightly less powerful range of kit from Ryobi. Just bear in mind that single time in the middle of a project when you need the greater torque or the deeper cut, you might be a wee bit frustrated. Now back to the chop saw, and these days I'm doing a lot of the work alone, especially in timber frame, because you can work so quickly in timber frame alone, and workflow is becoming more and more important. You're working in a team where you can split the tasks and have, say, one person cutting and one person fixing. Setting up a chop saw with its own cutting bench, it could be a big time saver. If you're on your own, however, it's a different story, and I've found that minimising the amount of tools you use is the fastest workflow. I cut all my framing just these 5 tools. I use this fantastic knife, a sharpened carpenter's pencil to go with it, this cordless circular saw by Dewalt using this blade, which is perfect for cutting stud work, an 8-meter sprung measure, and this beautiful speed square by Ox. With the circular saw, it's all about portability, run and gun solo working with speed. And since I'm working on my own so much, I just prefer to use a circular saw. Now let's get some more jargon for you. We sometimes call a circular saw a skill saw, buzz saw, I've heard it called, or if you're from my part of the world, a rip snorter. But for this, let's stick with circular saw. And if you do go the route of cutting with a circular saw, there's a couple of super important things to consider. First is the blade. Set the blade to marginally below the depth of the timber you're cutting, a millimetre or 2 tops. It reduces the risk of binding and kickback since the blade uses the most efficient ratio of surface area. It also prolongs the life of the blade. It's the most efficient way of cutting, so it drains less power from the battery, and it also won't take your fingers off if you place them in a silly spot. Sure, it's going to hurt and bleed, but you'll keep your fingers. Now, there's an essential tool to go with the circular saw. Since it doesn't have a guide or a fixed housing like the chop saw, we need our speed square every time for every cut. Now, I've used plenty of set squares or speed squares over the years, but this one from Ox is my favourite. Great size and ergonomics, punch slots for taking your pencil for the accuracy you need, and metric sizing. Most of the squares are in imperial, and I don't really get why manufacturers can't produce for both markets. It's true we mainly use the numeric parts of a speed square for doing angled cuts for things like rafters and bird's mouth joints, but occasionally I need to measure length using the square, and it's just a pain to have to reach for my tape where I'm always working in millimeters. I use an 8 metre tape over a 5 metre one, since I use running dimensions for setting out my centres for rafters and joists. 5 metres is often not long enough. Running dimensions gives far more accuracy. See my other video here for how to set out your joists accurately and why it's important. Spot mark your cuts and then use your speed square to cut the line. And why bother with a cut line if you're using your speed square as a guide for the saw? Well, it's to help you to avoid cutting along the line, since the blade has a few millimeters of thickness that will eat into your measurement and not give you the accuracy that you need. Line the outside of the blade to immediately beyond your pencil line for super accuracy. And that's one great advantage with the chop saw. Nowadays they come with a laser line that helps you do this without having to worry about placing the blade. I'll leave some links below to all the tools that I've talked about here and used in the video. With my centres marked, I'll measure each joist and add around 2 millimeters onto the length to help with securing the timber in place. Make a perpendicular line using the speed square at the mark, and then place the blade of the saw so it cuts immediately to the waist side of the timber. Now, kickback. Kickback is a very dangerous thing with any power tools, but especially with a circular saw, and I see inexperienced users making this mistake the first time they pick one up. Now, I remember showing our apprentices how to do this, and I could see that they're thinking, yeah, just let me get on with that lovely cutting. And it's very easy when your mind is on the end result, in this case the cut object that you're looking forward to get fixing and hammering with, to forget about the process, and that's when you're most prone to accidents. To avoid kickback when you set up your timber lengths for cutting, set up your studs so the short side of the offcut can just fall away. Anything over, say, 1.5 meters, and I won't cut like this, and I'll use 2 sets of sawhorses or a chop saw instead. That's really important. Otherwise you'll find at best the saw will jam towards the end of the cut, and at worst you'll get some very dangerous kickback, which happens so quickly it could catch a part of your body whilst the blade is still spinning, since you haven't had time in that split second to release the trigger. I've left some links to some videos below that expand on the safety issue, because I'm probably not explaining it fantastic here. But with that said, building with timber frame is such a pleasure, and cordless circular saws have just enhanced the experience. Let me know your thoughts below on circular saws versus mitre saws, and leave me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video.